I just use Asian Americans as an example just to show how it's not race it's not a person's skin color that creates their position in society, but it really is, where are they culturally? What are they contributing? What are the skills that they bring to the table?
Welcome to the Mikhaila Peterson podcast, episode 129. Quick news, I have my first live show. It's going to be a Q&A, because what else am I going to do? In Nashville. No, I'm just kidding. I could do a live podcast. I might do a live podcast. I think it's going to be a Q&A. Check it out. It's linked below. I am super excited and kind of nervous, to be honest. Well, maybe mostly excited. I hope to see some of you there. Come throw your questions at me. January 24th in Nashville, right before Dad goes on tour and I do the opening part of his tour. Anyway, for this episode, I'm taking a quick break from opposing views to bring you Kenny Xu, the president of the race-blind advocacy group Color Us United, author of An Inconvenient Minority, and the host of the Inconvenient Minority podcast, where he battles the elite woke narratives with provocative conversations about race, identity, and culture that challenge both the left and the right. Did you know that if Harvard didn't limit enrollment, 43% of their students would be Asian American? Wouldn't you say limiting enrollment is kind of racist? In today's episode, Kenny and I spoke about meritocracy, critical race theory, and their role in education across the US today. We covered terms you may not be familiar with, like white adjacency and inclusive math, and how a shift in incentives has led to a whole set of problems like university curriculums being dumbed down little by little. I hope you find this episode interesting, and if you do, be sure to hit subscribe. And remember, if you're around Nashville, you could come check out my show January 24th. Kenny Xu, welcome to my podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you located right now?
I'm in New Jersey.
Okay, cool. Before we get into things, can you give a brief background about who you are and what it is you do?
I'm the president of Color Us United. We advocate for race-blind America. I'm the author of the new book, An Inconvenient Minority, the attack on Asian American excellence in the fight for meritocracy, where I investigate the consequences of anti-racism in our culture, particularly how it affects a minority group who doesn't fit the anti-racist narrative that is Asian Americans. And I'm a journalist, I'm a podcaster, the host of the Inconvenient Minority podcast, and I write for many outlets.
So before we get into things, I think a couple of definitions would be good. One, what is meritocracy? Let's start with that. What does that mean?
Meritocracy is just inequality. It is why meritocracy is the idea that you should be, doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, you should just be judged on the basis of your merits. You should be judged on the basis of the skills that you have, the things that you can contribute. And it doesn't matter about irrelevant characteristics who you are. So whether you're black, white, a woman, or a man, gay or straight, you shouldn't be judged on any of those things. Those things shouldn't matter. You should just be judged on what you can contribute.
Okay, that makes sense. So then the next definition I think we should cover, because we're going to get into it, CRT, critical race theory. What is that?
Critical race theory is an idea developed at Harvard Law School, which I can get into, where it subdivides people into races that are privileged and oppressed. Whites are at the top, blacks are at the bottom, people of color are at the bottom, everything like that. And it assumes that the laws and structures that we have today are racist and therefore the cause of the racial inequalities and inequities that we have in our society today. Okay.
So I think we should start with, how has that theory, what do you think about that theory? Whether it's good or bad, and then how has that kind of infiltrated into the schooling system in America?
I think it's false. And the reason why is because Asian Americans disprove it. There are Asian Americans who basically should belong to the victim class, the oppressed class. They face historical discrimination in this country. Many of them come from countries that don't even know English. Many of them face significant disadvantages. They come in, they move into poor neighborhoods, Chinatown, Flushing, and their race didn't get them ahead. But because of their sheer hard work and cultural values that any race can achieve, they are able to advance beyond their station. 80%, for example, of Vietnamese Americans come here and they don't even know English. But in one generation, their kids grow up and graduate from college at a higher rate than even white Americans. And that's a result of the fact that Asian Americans study twice as many hours as the average American. Wow. They have more stable two-parent family structures. And I just use Asian Americans as an example, just to show how it's not race. It's not a person's skin color that creates their position in society, but it really is, where are they culturally? What are they contributing? What are the skills that they bring to the table?
Yeah. When did you notice critical race theory and these kind of conversations starting? Because I remember when I was little, I don't think there was any of this. I don't remember any of this in school. Everyone was pretty much equal. At least where I was from in Canada, everybody was equal and everyone was just judged based on how well they did on tests. And that was it. Did you know when this kind of started infiltrating into the education system?
So in critical race theory started at Harvard Law School at the behest of this individual named Derek Bell, who was a professor at Harvard Law School. And, he, in the 1970s, there was some agitation about racial inequality in this country. And he posited this theory. Our supposedly colorblind laws and principles are actually racist and are still stacked against Black Americans. And what happened from there was that theory advanced through educational grad schools, Columbia teachers colleges. It became the norm for advancing education in this country. So if you're an educational studies major, if you want to be a teacher or an administrator, you're learning critical pedagogy in a lot of these colleges and universities now, and a lot of these grad schools. And what critical pedagogy says is the job of the teacher is to awaken the individual to his place in the world, specifically his racial place in this world. And so that's when you have, things like we need to teach kids to be aware of their own privilege. We need to teach kids to be aware of their own oppression as a result of them being a part of this collective. So over the past 30 years, that has pretty much transformed the entire public education system, and that has become a standard that is now applied, in American public schools across the nation.
So what's the purpose of teaching people these things? Like say that there was a reason to teach people to, check their own privilege. What was the goal there behind all that? Like, what's the positive benefit of people understanding their privilege or where they are in society, according to the people who teach CRT?
The positive benefit is that, when an individual becomes awakened, he understands how to, when he becomes aware, the term woke, it's funny, it actually comes from this critical educator who coined the term wide awakeness. When an individual becomes wide awake about his place in society, then he can learn to deconstruct the structures that are putting him down. It's kind of a sort of Plato allegory of the cave kind of thing, as in, you come up into the light and you're seeing the light, and now you're seeing where you actually are. And as a result, when you come back down, you're forever changed. And then you can sort of advance in society through there.
And is that supposed to help people combat it by becoming more compassionate, or like what's my question? What are the actions people are supposed to take once they've become woke that improve society?
That improves society, more like deconstruct society, more like deconstruct and build a new society from the ashes, critical pedagogy. And when you're a kid, and the idea is, Stalin said, give me a child for 4 years, and I can turn him into a soldier, and I'll change his life forever. And that's effectively what critical pedagogy does. When you get a child and you make him aware of his racial oppression and everything like that, then he can come out, of that educational system and understand, how to sort of raise solidarity for his race and advocate on behalf of, his own racial oppression ideals. And more importantly, try to tear down capitalism, try to tear down meritocracy, try to tear down all of the structures that are putting him down, and hopefully install a new structure. And this new structure that is currently being imagined within critical race studies is this anti-racist socialist collective.
Okay, let's get into that a little bit then, because you'd think that, I guess the main goal is to dismantle what's going on now. But do they teach how they're going to improve things in the future, or is this all about changing things now and the future we'll figure it out then?
No, it's critical studies. Critical studies means we're critiquing society.
Oh, that's it.
When you say critical theory, the purpose of the theory is it's a critique. Their vision, they don't really offer like a separate vision.
That's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. Like, it's super easy to go into an establishment and point out everything that's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And you make this point a lot. Your father makes this point a lot. This is it's easy. It's easy to go and complain and try to tear down society. But if you don't have a reconstructive vision for it, then all you're ultimately doing is tearing down the good along with the bad. And this is why, with my book and my advocacy, my book An Inconvenient Minority and my advocacy, I am defending some of the good principles that we need to have in our culture, which is meritocracy, in my belief, is one of those principles that need to be defended. America was founded, and it's founded imperfectly, but it was founded upon the idea that the American dream is you can come from any background, and it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your background is. If you work hard, you have a chance to be treated on the basis of that hard work, not on the basis of that background. And that's the principle that I think unifies Americans and provides hope to anybody, from the poor Chinese kid in Flushing, Queens, to the Black kid in inner city Baltimore, to the rural kid in Appalachia, to know that there is opportunity in this country and that they won't be judged based on the things that they harbor in the past. I think that is the ideal that we need to resurrect in this culture today. That's the ideal that's directly under threat by CRT.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to throw some other terms at you that you talk about that I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with. But
sure.
What is white adjacency?
Let's assume this racial narrative is true. Let's assume that whites are at the top and blacks are at the bottom. And then, by the way, this was what I was taught when I was in college.
When was that?
2015. Yeah, that's when I was in college. And when I was in college, we were pretty much taught, if you're white, you're privileged. If you're black, you're oppressed. And
where did you go?
I went to Davidson College.
And what were you studying?
I was a math major.
Math?
Philosophy minor. Yeah.
So were you learning about this in math or just philosophy?
I was learning about this in my freshman orientation, Mikhaila.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, at least you paid for it.
Yeah, I paid dearly for it.
That's insane. Okay.
Yeah, it was. Let's assume that, yeah. So let's assume this narrative is true, and that minorities are at the bottom. But then Asian Americans become an inconvenient minority, and the Asian Americans become this inconvenient minority in this narrative because they are supposed to be like a person of color, kind of victimized, discriminated, everything like that. But instead, you see them higher incomes than whites, higher education than whites. And how does that come about? And the answer is, and the answer that the critical race theorists will give, well, it's because Asian Americans are like closer to whiteness. They have a proximity to whiteness. Right, right. They're abettors of white supremacy. They're like sort of in bed with the conspirator. So that's the term white adjacency. You know, we seem to have, even though we're not white, we benefit from sort of the leaking of white privilege onto ourselves.
Is there an explanation about why that happens, according to them?
Yeah, they would say it's because well, America, so their inherent assumption is that America is stacked against Black people. They don't like Black people, and in order to prove, to fix this with Asian Americans, they point to, well, Asian Americans were used as props. Sort of between 1960 and 2000, basically America imported a bunch of Asian Americans through the Immigration Naturalization Act of 1965. And these were educated Asian Americans, hardworking Asian Americans. And they used these Asian Americans and they said, look at these minorities. This is proof that minorities can't succeed in this country. So Black Americans, it's really your fault why you're down. So they're sort of using the critical race ideas, that they're using Asian Americans as props to sort of attack Black people for not succeeding in this country.
Okay. So when you were in college learning about this stuff, did you know right away that there was something up with it? Like, were you skeptical at first, or did it sound like something reasonable when you were there? And what did your friends think?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say I was open to the idea at first because, when I was growing up kind of in a highly educated area and everything like that, you could see that a lot of these immigrants and everything like that were highly educated, did come from highly educated backgrounds. And, it seemed like, okay, well, maybe that's the reason. Maybe there is something going on here that I don't know. But then, when I was writing my book, An Inconvenient Minority, I started looking at the experiences of the poor Asian immigrants who come to this country. And I can tell you, the poor Asian immigrants who come to this country, who don't come from any education, they're working extremely, extremely hard, probably harder than even some of the highly educated Asian immigrants who are coming to this country. Because when you're an immigrant, you don't have social privilege, you don't have connections to back you up. All you have are your skills. All you have is your talent. And so that's what they put their bets on. They put their bets on their kids' education to achieve generational mobility. So they're really studying extra hard. They're spending weekends in test prep centers. They are saving up every extra penny to buy textbooks for their kid. And to me, that showed me the direct refutation of this. It's not that America wanted Asians to succeed necessarily to prop up the case against Black people. It's that Asian Americans came in and through their sheer hard work and effort, were able to succeed. And anybody who applies that level of effort, will have the same chance.
Yeah, I hate to be this blunt about it, but it seems like a lot of people who propose critical race theory haven't actually seen anybody do any hard work. Like if they're just saying that doesn't matter. It's like, have you seen 80 hours of work a week?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't just come to people.
Right. Right. It's so funny that, and this is sort of where I was alluding to earlier in the conversation. Critical race theory is an elite ideology. It was forged in the halls of the Ivy Leagues.
That's crazy.
By people, by academics who, sat in their offices theorizing about the world. And there's a reason why that's the case, because even if you go to an inner city public school today, population 99% Black, or 95% Black, 5% Hispanic. You go to a Baltimore public school, and I've talked with people there, I've talked with former teachers, I've talked with students there. You realize even in those places, there is a hierarchy that is based not on race, but on competence. How could the hierarchy be based on race if all of the students and nearly all of the teachers are Black? And there are, even in that hierarchy, even in those classrooms, there are some students who want to study more. There are some students who really want to study hard, who really prioritize their education. And there are some students who are violent gangsters, and they're disrupting the entire classroom. And because they're not disciplined enough, that's the reason why, those schools, those kids are not given safe and effective environments to learn. It's really sad, but critical race theory unfairly puts the blame of this situation on white people when these places, it's not about white people at all. It's about what's going on in the culture within these schools and within these communities.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So is there a solution here? Do you talk about any type of solution or how people should be acting as opposed to teaching CRT? Or are we just doomed?
I think that the solution, part of the issue with sort of reconstructing the entire solution is because our system has gotten, the CRT has really come in and lashed itself into all of the educational theory. So it's very hard to extricate ourselves from that. But I would say, to start out, we need to eliminate racial preferences. And we need to put a blanket ban on racial preferences in all universities, all public schools, high schools, everything like that. Because racial preferences provides all of the wrong incentives. Basically, if you are, just because of your background, if you're able to sort of acquire victim capital, then you're able to get into universities or get into schools that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten into. And what that creates, Mikhaila, by the way, that creates an industry of victimhood. It creates an incentive, a strong incentive for people to create the most victim-y story about themselves that they possibly could, so that they can get the maximum benefit and they can have the maximum leverage to get into whatever prestigious positions that they want to get into. So when you eliminate the industry of victimhood because of race preferences, then that's when the incentive to push CRT upon people and to push this racial systemic racism narrative starts to go away. And I think that's when you can start healing.
I want to talk to you guys about NordVPN. I use VPNs when I'm traveling, which I'm doing a lot, way too much. They didn't do Disney Plus in Serbia? Well, they do with NordVPN. Can't believe I'm never going back to Serbia after that. So hopefully there aren't any Serbians watching. Anyway, I can't believe there are areas of the world that actually ban Disney. And did you know that they're putting trigger warnings in some Disney movies? Anyway, this isn't supposed to be about Disney. This is just supposed to be about NordVPN. So I'll get back to that. NordVPN, not only are they sponsoring me, which is fantastic, but they allow me to get into Netflix wherever I am. If I'm somewhere sketchy, I can also protect myself from getting my information stolen by using NordVPN in said sketchy areas. Or if you're doing something sketchy on the internet, a VPN is probably what you're looking for. I also like NordVPN because it's the fastest VPN in the world. It doesn't slow down my internet when I'm streaming like other VPNs I've used. NordVPN is something I'd really recommend. They come in handy in restaurants, airports, other countries that block certain websites, and to hide your information when you want to. NordVPN also has an amazing code for my listeners. Grab your holiday season deal by going to nordvpn.com/TMPP to get up to 73% off your NordVPN plan, plus a bonus gift. Code TMPP at nordvpn.com/TMPP, like the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. I've seen 65% off from these guys, 70% off, but 73%? Unheard of. Again, that's nordvpn.com/TMPP, or just use code TMPP for NordVPN's unheard of deal. Enjoy the rest of the episode. So can you give me some examples of this race-based preference? Like, talk a little bit about Harvard admissions at the moment.
I study the Harvard admissions case because Harvard is the most well-known race preference practitioner in the nation right now. It's the most well-known, it's the most elite, it's the one that everybody wants to get into. Not just Asians, whites, blacks, Hispanics, everybody wants to get into Harvard. And so Harvard has, Harvard's race-based policy goes like this. If you are Asian, or if you are Asian, you have to score 440 points higher on the SAT to have the same chance of admission as a black student, about 300 points higher to have the same chance of admission as a Hispanic student, and about 150 points higher to have the same chance of admission as a white student. And the reason why is because,
Wow. I can't believe that there's a narrative that makes this okay.
This is CRT justifies this, though. CRT justifies this because of exactly what we've been talking about. Because according to CRT, Black people are the most oppressed, therefore they deserve the most preferences to rectify for that. And then with Asians, it's kind of a different story. With Asians, Harvard is just worried that if they admitted based on merit alone, that there would be too many Asians who would get into Harvard. Because Harvard's own Office of Institutional Research says that if Harvard admissions were just a meritocracy and were just based on the objective rankings and there wasn't race put in, Asians would make up about 43% of the university. Instead, they make up about 20%. So that's a penalty of half right there. This is racial preferences in action.
Interesting. Okay. So what should people in school do to is there a way to combat this, or do they just have to keep an eye out for information that isn't right and take it with a grain of salt?
Yeah. Well, there's a major lawsuit that your listeners might be, and that you should be really interested in. It's the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard lawsuit. And this lawsuit, filed by a group of Asian Americans, is trying to take down Harvard's racial preferences system. I think for good reason, right? Because these are the students that are most harmed by Harvard's racial preferences system. And this lawsuit, I think, it started in 2014 and it continued into the district court in 2018, and now it's at the foot of the Supreme Court. So if the Supreme Court of the United States accepts this case, it could change the future of race preferences forever.
When is that supposed to happen?
It could happen next year. It could happen in 2022. Yeah, early 2022.
Okay, that would change things dramatically.
Yeah. And it would change things because it would now Harvard is doing its very best to try to defend its system. It has actually spent over $40 million trying to defend the use of race in admissions. And I think what it shows is that Harvard really wants to protect this CRT narrative, and Harvard really wants to protect sort of the multicolored quilt of its college that it sort of projects upon the rest of the world.
Well, it would look really bad if Harvard came out as racist.
Yeah.
They're probably not that into that. That is such a waste of money. I'm not even sure what's going to happen with some of these institutions, to be honest, if all they're teaching is, I mean, math is one thing, but humanities, and then it turns out all you learn in humanities is CRT and, you know, feminist theory, and then you can't get a job, and then that makes you resentful, and then you're in debt and you're resentful, and then you have a reason to be resentful because of everything you paid to learn in university. It's like, what a disaster.
It's true. Okay, so I guess just my personal story on this. I was going to be an English major. I was interested in studying literature. I was interested in studying the great books. But you know, as I progressed through my university, I realized the rigor of the curriculum was comparatively lower than the math classes that I was taking.
Just a tad.
Just a tad, a little more than a tad.
Yeah, I switched I'll let you continue, but I took classics and psychology, but like Bachelor of Arts psychology, not science. And I switched into biomedical science. And the difference in the amount of work between classics and psychology and biomedical science, I could not believe it. It was like 8 times as much work.
Wow.
It was crazy. And I know that in the biomedical science, like math and physics, those were the hardest courses. But for anyone listening who hasn't taken like a science or math course in university, they're so much more dense than the humanities courses. It's unbelievable. I don't know how people survive those degrees. Anyway, continue.
Right. No, exactly. But here's the thing. It doesn't have to be that way, because these English classes can be just as rigorous as these math and science classes can be. If the books you're reading with the formal structure, you know, analyzing poetry, analyzing British literature, getting a grip on that, you can have just as rigorous of an English career. I sincerely believe that, just as rigorous of a philosophy curriculum as you could math and science. But they actually intentionally make these majors less rigorous. They actually intentionally make it because they're concerned about their graduation rates. Universities are concerned about their graduation rates. And here's the thing. Race preferences makes all of this worse. Because what happens is when you start admitting kids into universities who are not qualified on the basis of merit to get into these universities, and these kids, well, you know, it looks really bad if you have a low graduation rate, if they're failing out of classes. So what happens is that you actually have to make the majors, you have to lower the rigor of the majors so that these students are able to actually graduate. It hurts everybody, but it also waters down the prestige of the degree.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising that the universities aren't more concerned about that. That they're just avoiding that as a fact, which seems fairly obvious. Although I guess the idea with CRT is you artificially, you know, bring in a bunch of people who couldn't get in based on tests under the assumption that it's because of their race, and that was why they were performing badly on tests, right? So then when they get there and everyone's on equal terms, they should perform well. So I guess if you fully buy into CRT, which I suppose these people do, then the assumption would be you wouldn't have to make courses easier because people should all be equal, right?
I guess, yeah. And then the alternative, what CRT people do, and this is like a very clever maneuver, is what happens is that we see that there are strong differences right now in average SAT scores, for example, by race. Asians score the highest as an average SAT score, then whites, then Latinos, then Black Americans. There are a lot of reasons for that. Nothing to do with race, nothing to do with race themselves, everything to do with the environment of the school, the environment of the culture that you grow up in. But CRT people will see this and then they say, well, the reason why is because the test is racist, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the test is stacked against Black people. That's why they're performing lower. And the ironic thing about this is that that's actually the most racist thing you can say, to say that Black people are inherently less good at taking tests than other people. It's the exact same test. It's administered to everybody. It's a test in math and English, and by saying the test is racist is actually admitting the natural inferiority of a certain race, which is just the ugliest thing that I could imagine. So CRT, I think, in an effort to be anti-racist, actually becomes racist.
Oh, yes, certainly. So you talked a bit about Vietnamese immigrants and how hard people work just to catch up, given the fact that they come to a new place, can't speak English, don't have any connections, like you said. Mm-hmm. Have you found or spoken with anyone that had ways to help people along that are naturally in a more difficult place? Because like everyone can agree that if you grow up in a white family that already has educated parents, that has a whole bunch of money, that's going to make your life easier in that way growing mm-hmm. up than being raised by immigrants with no money who don't speak English. Obviously, those are two different situations, and one is mm-hmm. going to be more difficult. So are there ways that you've found that can make it easier for people? Or is it just like, this is the hand you were dealt, buckle down and work?
Yeah, I have a deep empathy for people who grow up in those situations of any race. And what I see with the success of people who have grown up in Chinatown and or Vietnamese town, or and who have eventually trained their kids and then they've become successful. What I actually see, funny enough, is a willingness to go beyond the parameters of the public education system. I think that has to be the number one thing, because the public a lot of it is because of CRT. The public education system right now in the United States is a mess. It is very much a mess. Lowering standards, teaching distracting things. Now they're implementing critical race theory in the curriculum. They're not teaching math right. One math educator that I talked to said that they're now teaching math in pods, like students are supposed to teach math to each other. Which is
good luck with that.
Right. Like, you don't, like that definitely helps. It doesn't. Just because of the way the public education system is, I think you do have to put a little effort to go beyond the public education system. Either find a good charter school for your kid or homeschool your kid, or find a good private school that maybe could offer your kid a scholarship. I think you do have to go beyond that. And I think your kid, it actually is proven, statistically shown, that even Black students in New York City who go to charter schools eventually close 66% of the racial achievement gap in that city.
Okay. So you take things into your own hands, basically don't rely on the system at this point.
Or at least do enough to question the system and to choose your own options. Yeah.
Dad and I have an interesting project going on in the next year or so where we're going to be bringing people on and building online courses.
Yeah.
So that's going to be fun. It's like a project that's upcoming so that there'll be people teaching properly, like lecture style, proper classes, instead of all this ideology that's destroying everything at the moment in the education system. Do you think it's better to do like private schools or Catholic schools or something? Is there anywhere that CRT hasn't infiltrated, or is it everywhere at the moment?
So I would be vigilant about the language that your schools are using. If frequently you see, or if the one thing they see on your website, on that school's website, is diversity and inclusion or equity, or we want to affirm students. Remember, that is the exact language that is used in the critical pedagogy literature, in the sense that they're trying to make students sort of be wide awake to all of the structures that are oppressing them. And the term inclusion implies that currently society or whatever, or the world is against you or is excluding you. So it's actually appealing to your sense of marginalization. If you see language that is appealing to your kids' sense of marginalization, I would avoid that. I would avoid that school.
Okay.
It's happening too. It is happening in private schools too. There is an elite private school in Boston, Massachusetts called the Windsor School for All Girls that I got a chance as a journalist. I reviewed some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion documents, and the language is all about deconstructing systemic racism, and we want to deconstruct linguistic racism, which is basically,
how are you going to get a job? Like, what's the long-term plan with this? You go to university and they teach you how to deconstruct literature. How is anyone going to pay you to do that?
They do. So that's a classic conservative argument against all this. You're not gonna be able to get a job. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
But the issue with that argument is that they actually are creating an industry to pay you to do this stuff. Like there is now the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry is now a 10 billion plus industry. It is found in every Fortune 500 company, and your job is to peddle this kind of narrative.
Wow.
So you act that the problem now is not just that you're being taught these things in college. The problem is that you can actually be paid to do these things to other people and perpetuate this ideology to other people. That's the problem.
That's a huge problem. Okay. Okay, so you said that there's this fight with some of the Asian students at Harvard, and they're at the Supreme Court level, trying to shut down the race-based preferences that Harvard has. So that could change things. This is a tricky battle to have. What's your goal with your book?
I want to make the world aware of the consequences of anti-racism. And just because I've seen it myself in my own eyes in the college admissions process, which is effectively an anti-racist admissions policy. It's been happening for the past 30 years. Harvard's been doing this for the past 30 years. And what I see ultimately, it's a penalization of people who want to succeed, cultures who want to be excellent, cultures who want to be academically excellent. If Asian Americans want to be academically excellent, we should reward that. If there are some cultures who want to be athletically excellent or business excellent or excellent at music or excellent at the arts, we should reward that. There are a disproportionate number of Black Americans in the NBA today. What are we going to do? Are we going to say, well, there's too few white Americans, we got to put more white Americans into the NBA? Or there are disproportionately more Jewish Americans right now who want to go into the arts, and that's what they should do. We should reward that. But if a culture decides that they want to pursue academic, math and science, STEM excellence, or excellence of any kind academically, then we should reward that as well. And we are progressing from a culture right now that is transitioning away from meritocracy, judging people on their merits, to a culture that is judging people on the basis of their background again. And I want to make the world aware of the consequences of what that is going to happen.
Yeah, this is scary too, because it's not exactly happening everywhere. It's just happening really badly in North America, and I would say Western Europe. But there are other places around the world that don't care about this at all. And so they're all going based on meritocracy, right? Who does what best, and then give them more resources, which is going to progress their society way faster than whatever we're doing. And unfortunately, I think people, especially who are pushing some of these theories, They're just stuck in North America. They're not even aware that there are other places out there that are going to be like, something else could become the next superpower, that aren't focused on things like stopping people from pursuing sciences, which seems like a silly thing to do. And then spending a bunch of money on proving why that's a good idea.
Yeah. No, you're right, Mikhaila. I mean, it's look at China. China went through the Cultural Revolution, where basically they took all of the intellectuals and they took all of the people who were the best farmers, the best workers, the best laborers, and they put them through re-education camp, and they got rid of the universities, they got rid of the merit-based admissions process. They admitted people based on political ideology, and as a result—
When was this?
This was in the 1960s to the 1970s under Mao Zedong.
Okay.
And basically their entire country went through a brain drain, and they fled to other countries. The Chinese fled to other countries like the United States, like Western Europe, like India, the Philippines, Vietnam, another place. And it caused a massive brain drain in their country, and they're actually still recovering from that today. So they understand the consequences of destroying meritocracy in this country, and we are unfortunately on that road as well.
Oh yeah, that's scary. I feel like, okay, so that was China, and then the similar thing happened in Germany, right? A whole bunch of Jewish people left, and a lot of them came to America. And then the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. A lot of the super educated people left and came to America, which made America a very interesting place to be, filled with a whole bunch of immigrants that were incredibly smart. And now we're doing the same thing because everyone's forgotten what happened.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And it's funny you mentioned the Soviet Union. There's a professor that I interviewed from Princeton named Sergei Kleinerman, math professor from what used to be the Soviet Union, or a satellite state, I forget which. And he said to me, and I asked him, why did you study math? And he said, Kenny, math was the only subject that I could study where I felt like I could study the truth, because everything else that I studied was going to be repressed and my work would have vanished.
Oh, that's creepy.
It's funny. So everybody has this stereotype of like Eastern European intellectuals like being really good at math or chess or something like that. What people don't understand is that the reason why so many of them flocked to math was they're actually just smart. They could have done a lot of things. They could have done arts, they could have done business, but the culture was so hostile to both of those other things that the only place that they felt like they could have a refuge to actually pursue the truth was in math.
Oh, that's creepy. That's like, I felt, not to put myself in the same shoes as what happened in the USSR or anything, but definitely when I was taking classics in psychology, I can remember studying Homer through a feminist lens. It wasn't what the course said, but I got there and it was like, yeah, this is Homer through a feminist lens. And I was just like, what? As if Homer was thinking about that. Like, what about Homer through a Homer lens? But, and then switching into biomedical science, I was like, okay, I'll just ignore it. And this is when Dad was all up in arms being like, people are taking over the humanities, the world is ending. I was like, the sciences are fine, don't worry about it. And then it started infiltrating the sciences. And I don't know what it's like now, but that's scary. That similarity is scary. You said when you were taking math, did you have people come in to teach about anything like CRT, or was it in textbooks, or had it not infiltrated yet? What does the infiltration look like?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned math. I just finished up a long form article about CRT and math. So with the new trend right now, and I didn't really see this in my school, but also that's kind of because I selected into courses and professors that I felt would actually teach math the right way. So, and I was largely right. But the new trend is inclusive math, which is basically, we need to, the premise behind inclusive math is that, we need to try all of these new tactics to sort of we need to get a person's interest in math going. Like, so basically your objective is to make people interested in math, because once they're interested in math and they love math, then they're just going to learn all by themselves math, and they won't need a teacher ever again. So your objective is to make math fun and exciting for a person and relevant to a person. The other word is relevant. As a result of inclusive math, you have these textbooks called what is called the Heart of Mathematics. That is, sort of playing, that has chapter titles like fun with numbers, and these are for college students. And yes, if you read this textbook, it's fun, but this textbook is not going to prepare you with systems of equations. It's not going to prepare you with linear polynomials. It's not going to prepare you with the prerequisites to calculus. So ultimately, all it really is a lowering of standards in the name of diversity and inclusion.
So I forgot that the idea there is that, people who aren't interested in math and physics aren't interested because they haven't been taught properly or something. It's not as if, men maybe like math better. That it's not that, it's that people aren't taught to enjoy it properly.
Right. I think it's people think that the reason why some people can't do math is just because they're not excited about it. And the truth is, no, the reason why some people can't do math is because they were badly taught. They were poorly taught.
Well, and it's really, really difficult at that level. You actually have to be really smart in order to understand math.
It's a little different. I actually
maybe you're underestimating yourself.
I wasn't okay. If you challenge a person at the appropriate level, you can actually move a person through math education fairly quickly, even if that person is somewhat of a slower learner. The problem with their math education today, or classes today, is that they're putting like really high speed, high level students in the same classroom with kids who are still learning 1 + 1. So if you're in first grade, already there are discrepancies in a person's intellectual capability to comprehend math. You have a person who cannot even add to a person, sitting next to a person who already knows multiplication tables.
Yeah.
And when you're a teacher, when you're a single teacher and you have no ability sorting, because you're not allowed to do ability sorting right now because it's inequitable. But if you're a teacher, you have to teach the middle. So what happens is that the guy who's really good at math doesn't get a challenging education. He gets really bored and he's not learning as much math as he could learn, while the child who's at the bottom of the heap is getting completely confused and it's not learning math at the level that he should be learning. So this entire CRT dominated equity phenomenon is destroying math education for kids. I sincerely believe that anybody really can learn math if they're taught at the appropriate speed.
Okay, so I want to go back, I think, to maybe we should talk about how people can actually succeed. Because people are taught, okay, you're stuck in this box of race or disability or being a woman or being trans or whatever little box you're put into. And being taught that you're stuck in a box kind of artificially limits what you can do, right? If you're brainwashed into believing that there's a ceiling you can't pass, then you're just trapped there. So are there ways that people should be thinking rather than looking at all the problems in their life and how those are stopping them? Is there a different mindset that people should have in order to actually succeed in life?
I think that the wisdom of the crowd is underrated. Everybody wants to be a rebel. Everybody wants to be a cowboy. In America, we have those archetypes for a reason, because they inspire innovation and they're really great. But in order to be an effective cowboy, you need to know how to carry a gun. You need to know how to ride a horse. And I think if you want to be an effective person at your career, you need to learn how to speak well. You need to learn how to, understand and speak proper English, and to have a dense vocabulary that conveys that you know what you're talking about. You need to have basic math and conceptual skills to be able to show other people that you're capable of solving problems and getting them right and getting them done efficiently. You should make some sort of effort to acquire a social community where you can acquire social status, where there is a hierarchy that you can move up through. Now, it doesn't mean if it's a completely corrupt hierarchy, then avoid it at all costs. As you and I have been talking about, Mikhaila, in our college education, there are corrupt hierarchies. You need to recognize that, but you need to find some sort of social group that you can sort of move up, that has values, that has cultures, and assimilate and acclimate to that culture, because that ultimately makes you a more competitive person. And by being a more competitive person, you become a person who can sort of understand and play different games, and will be able to succeed better at any one of them. So I think that's some of the advice that I would give based on my research and some of the experience that I've been given.
How do you feel about people doing free work for other people, like finding a mentor and then working for free? Because I know when I was in university, that was looked down on a lot because everybody's broke. So you're like, oh, well, it's free work. What's the purpose of that? But then when I started actually meeting people who were really smart, if you just find a really smart person and you start helping them, they'll appreciate, and then you get free education that way. And that's potentially, depending on the person, more valuable than whatever you're going to be learning in school.
Yeah. Oh, hey, I think it's really interesting. Free work.
Depends how much work, right? But
so I guess the example, or I guess the comparison we should ask is like, would you rather work for $15 an hour at McDonald's, or would you rather work for free next to Neil deGrasse Tyson? And the answer is you would rather work for free next to Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if you have options, I suggest you take them. Align yourself with somebody who is competitive and succeeding academically, athletically, in a business sense. I'm for it, as long as it doesn't, of course, take over your life, and as long as they're not exploiting you.
Yes. Yeah. So what's next for you? What's your plan for the next year?
I'm on tour for An Inconvenient Minority. I'm president of Color Us United. And, we are a race-blind advocacy group. We do campaigns, to ask and to force the hand of nonprofits and corporations who are pushing woke ideology. Our big campaign right now is with the Salvation Army, actually. They just asked their members, they're such a good organization, it's so sad. They just asked their members to repent for racism. They're, because these members are definitely the least racist people that you could possibly imagine in the Salvation Army, So, we gathered 10,000 signatures. So we're organizing, getting employees. It's colorusunited.org, gathering employees, and pushing the resistance against CRT and woke ideology in all facets of our life.
Have you got a lot of negative feedback from doing that?
No. I know the majority of Americans want a race-blind society. I was part of a campaign in California last year. Basically, a group of CRT advocates and lawmakers wanted California to reinstitute race preferences in admissions in public contracting. So if you were a certain race, you could get a leg up, and if you were another race, you would get a kick down. And they put it to a vote. California, not exactly a conservative stronghold, voted 57% to 43% no on that proposition. So I know the majority of Americans are behind colorblindness, and I will continue to coast off of that. Doesn't mean I haven't gotten negative feedback, but I think it is a worthy idea that we should be pushing.
Awesome. Okay. Well, you mentioned a few websites, but just to reiterate, if people want to follow you,
Where should they go online?
You can go on my Twitter at Kenny M Xu, M like Mary, or my Instagram, same thing. Follow me on YouTube, Kenny Xu. That's my channel, and that's my podcast. My podcast is the Inconvenient Minority podcast. And then go to coloristunited.org to learn more.
Sweet. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Mikhaila.